Thank you for coming. I'm Nirmal Mehta. I moved down here from the DC area 3 years ago, or almost 3 years ago, and I work for a company called Booz Allen Hamilton. I run our digital R&D team in the firm. You can find me at Normal Faults. The typical circuit I do is a talk I do about empathy, and this is not that talk. It's dramatically different. Like Chris mentioned, this is the first time I'm talking about this subject, CNAB. I'm also a Docker captain, and I really am an awful organizer of the Docker Raleigh meetup. Anyone here subscribe to that meetup? That's probably why. I've been on the road since January, so I haven't had a chance to really sit down and organize any meetups there. I promise they'll start kicking back up again. But this is, I'm a local Docker captain with Tim Tyler, and this is something that was announced at DockerCon EU back basically like half a year ago, and it's the Cloud Native Application Bundle. Who here has heard anything about this? All right, do you want to come up here and do this talk? All right, so a couple caveats on this. Number one is, I was talking to some other Docker captains earlier this week, and I had a little bit of a demo going. It was very basic, and the captain was like, "Hey, when's your meetup?" And I'm like, "On Wednesday." He's like, "Can you postpone it like a couple months?" I'm like, "No, not really. Chris would kill me." They were like, "Don't do the demo." I was like, "Why?" And they were like, "All the stuff you're going to demo is going to change dramatically in 2 months or 3 months from now. And you don't want to confuse everybody when you like present something and then like 3 months when they actually come around to like looking at it again, it's totally different." So I'm removing the demo component of that, and feel free to leave this meetup if that's what you were looking for.
No, don't leave the meetup.
Just ignore this part of the meetup and just network amongst yourselves. However, I can commit to, if there's space in the schedule, either coming back to Triangle DevOps and doing a quick demo another time, or organizing the Docker Raleigh meetup, which is where this should really be, and doing a demo once that all solidifies. So that tells you how new this stuff is. The spec kind of was formalized late last year, like not even version 1 kind of stuff. I've gotten permission. This talk is basically just ripped with permission from Gareth Rusgrove, who as of March is no longer employed at Docker. And he's one of the main driving forces behind CNAB. And I'm kind of redoing part of his talk that he did in January. And since January, there's been a dramatic amount of changes. So all that kind of stuff is evolving too fast for this to be like a demo and tools kind of talk. And this is more like, this is a new concept, introducing it to the world, and would like to see if there's people interested in contributing. That's kind of what this talk is about. All right, with all those caveats and shielding and insurance in place, let's just move forward. So this is an introduction to cloud native application bundles. There'll be 3 parts to this. A little background on why the folks behind this decided to create this spec. Diving into the actual specification and some of the tools that are out there now, and that's the part which is evolving quite rapidly. And if you know this better than I do, please don't call me out till the end, and you can correct me all at one time, all right? Unless I'm like egregiously bad, like way off. So the Cloud Native Application Bundle was announced at DockerCon EU, and it's a collaboration of a bunch of folks from the Helm, who here uses Helm on Kubernetes? All right, same people that understand CNAB. Who here uses Kubernetes or Docker? All right, wow, we're doing it in the triangle. I mean, for work, not just like at home or something. Okay, all right. So it's a specification for packaging distributed applications, and that's kind of I'll go into kind of the details of that, but there was a lot of kind of work and thought that was put behind this, but it's still kind of evolving, and the line between what it's supposed to do and what it's not trying to do is kind of evolving, and it's a little bit blurry right now. But if there's one thing I would like everyone to take away from this, is that just take a look at it at some point in the future. Take a look at the spec, take a look at some of the tools, and see if it kind of fits with what you're looking to do and fits maybe some of the problems that you're trying to solve in your organization. So what is the impetus behind it? So we're kind of like, I would say like 2 years ago, everyone was kind of still trying to figure out how to get into the cloud, how to migrate their enterprise apps, maybe like 3 or 4 years ago. And then there's like, there wasn't that much of an adoption of Kubernetes. It was kind of the early days still. And then all of a sudden, you know, with OpenShift and with Docker supporting Kubernetes and a big push to cloud adoption, there's been a massive migration to the cloud and a massive migration to Kubernetes. And with that is this transition from our traditional applications to distributed applications. And I think we're all going through that process. And what the folks behind CNAB realized is that distributed applications are here now. Like it's not like some like thing that everyone's trying to get to. Like we're all living it now, and it's happening faster. And with that comes with some extra kind of set of problems, right? We're kind of in the second stage of distributed application work, if you will. You know, the first stage was kind of understanding what the cloud was, and then maybe containerization and like making your workloads more portable. The second phase is kind of like, okay, we're like all there, but it took us like, now we're managing all these tools to like automate our standing up of our environments, and we have all these other things that are managing our container deployments, and all these other tools that are managing how to do builds and shipping images everywhere. And we don't really have a great way, like it's all kind of all over the place. And so now we're kind of entering that world of the next level of abstraction when it comes to this kind of level of a packaged distributed application. And what they realized was there needed to be some kind of package-like specification for a full distributed application, and not just like one container or one like Kubernetes deployment. Now, you might be thinking, hello, I use Helm, or I use charts, or I use Terraform, or I use Ansible. I already have a package-like definition for my application. Now, how many people here use a ton of different like tools in the organization? Is it just one tool in your organization? No, it's a ton of tools. So let me back up 1 second. We want to treat these distributed applications like an actual application. And right now, you can't do all these things like with all those tools in a really easy way. You kind of have to mash them all together and define that in whatever workflow you have in your organization. And if you go to another business unit or another group, they're going to have some other set of tools doing these same steps. So what does it mean to be an application package? We want it packaged up. We want to be able to ship that thing around. And this is relevant, that kind of one of the impetuses behind here is that there might be non-traditional distribution platforms. Like everything's rosy if you're on the cloud and you got super amounts of bandwidth, but it starts to degrade when you're doing that Tom Clancy stuff that person was talking about. So that's the world I live in. I've 10 years at Booz Allen. I've worked in almost every part of the government, and I've worked in parts of the government where there's no internet. And like, for example, I'm just going to toot my own horn because, you know, it's all about pain. You know, I would hit a problem, go back outside to my car, open up a laptop, connect to cell phone, hotspot, Google that problem, like literally print off web pages, like PDFs, burn them onto a CD, bring them inside, failed, all right, go back outside. Like that was how we did things, and it's a nightmare. So distribution, don't just think like what the easy path is. This is still a really big challenge, even in organizations that are hybrid or whatnot. We want to be able to install applications multiple times in multiple locations. I want to be able to hand this application or this set of tools to to some other person and have them be able to install it in multiple places, dev, test, prod, whatever, right? Mom's garage. I want to be able to configure it, upgrade it, uninstall it, remove it, monitor it, interrogate it, see what's up, what the status is.
Emphasize uninstall.
Yeah, uninstall is a very tricky one, right? Now, I can tell you CNAB is not a solution for all this. It's a specification and standard to help wrap around these kinds of actions that's agnostic to the tools underneath it. And I'll get to that in a second. So how many tools do you all use, right? So this is just a short list of all the things that you can use today to be able to configure your distributed applications or just straight up applications. And there's, every day there's another one, right? Who has custom made tools that they've written in-house, or because you feel like there's a gap here, right? So someone might be using Docker and Helm and Kubernetes config and running their stuff on Azure and packaging that up, and that's their distributed application. Someone else in your own organization could be using Terraform and using a little bit of serverless framework and mostly Bash, right? Like we're still all using Bash somewhere to glue things together. So we have this wide array of tools that solve how the workflow of putting together an application looks like, right? And they do them well, right? Like, and they're opinionated, and people have their kind of camps, and they like what they like to do. But we're at that point where we really need something to kind of standardize how to describe how all these things are put together to actually build the application that you want to deliver. So for example, imagine on day one, you got a new hire and they're coming into your group, and you have like, who's gone through this process? Like, all right, I'm Nirmal, I'm like, welcome to meet you. I'm at SAS or something, or IBM or whatnot, right, Lenovo. And they're like, all right, in my group, here's your Terraform scripts. Go to this GitLab instance and download that. You'll want to install this version of Docker for Windows on your Lenovo laptop. We have an AWS environment on the East Coast, and we have one for our lab here. These are the credentials, and we're using serverless framework, this version, right? Like that's the conversation. That is like probably a README. If you're in a good DevOps organization, there'll be a README and some scripts to maybe automatically install that on your laptop. This is how we do pull requests, right? Now, if I 5 years into it and we're doing I go move to another business unit, they might be like, hey, we use Helm, and we've got this Docker repository here, and we're using Azure because our CEO, CTO of our group doesn't like AWS because they got boned on pricing like back in the day, and so we got Azure going on. So all that stuff has versions, they have configuration elements, they have credentials, right? CNAB is a specification to package up all the things, not just the end application, but all the other things that you need to actually build that application, including the workflow and the versions of that. And it doesn't dictate what you want to use, or what you're supposed to use to do that. It just dictates information that you should provide in a format, so that if you're following that format, it's easy for other higher level tooling to be able to automate and do those one-click installs and uninstalls and upgrades with that standardized awareness. Does that kind of make sense? All right. Let me know if I'm losing you guys. So multi-service applications often use multiple tool chains, right? That's what I'm basically describing. So there's lots of different versions of those tools. How many people have one version of Terraform that they're running everything on, or one version of the AWS SDK even, or one version of Ansible? Exactly. And oftentimes all that stuff is separated from your application, right? Like it's not tracked like your application's tracked. And we're kind of just getting there. I think we still have some work to do in the tooling around version control over just applications itself. But we have all this other stuff, right? I would also add to this, like a Jenkins file is like a good, another kind of, entity in here. Now, a lot of these So yeah, more versions of more tools. And this is just gonna keep increasing as there's more features and newer tools that come through. So what we wanna get to is a point where we have a package that has all that in it, and you can just run an action, provide some parameters, and install it, or upgrade it, or uninstall it. And so CNAB is an attempt, and it's still a work in progress, at defining a specification for what that looks like. It's kind of the evolution of where we are as an industry. It's that next level, right? We're kind of like at that point where we're defining compose files or Kubernetes module, Kubernetes Helm, whatever, you know, or kind of composing these things together. This is kind of the next layer of abstraction around that. If you want to see an example that will run right now, take a look at Miguel Trevino's blog post from Bitnami. They were like involved with this early spec and wanted to kind of test it out, and they packaged up AWS RDS configuration and Kubernetes Helm scripts together in this new specification. And if you have that specification, they can hand you an image that automatically makes a distributed application that connects to an RDS instance. And it's all packaged together in that one spec. Does that make sense? That's an example of that. So CNAB is not about specifying what those underlying resources are and what your workflow is. It's about packaging that workflow together as a standardized specification. So now the other question that comes up is like, why do we need another package format? Every one of these tools, not every one of them, but a lot of these tools have their own package formats. So there's the old XKCD, right? Like, why do we need more standards? So the idea around standards, and I'm not a representative from CNAB, the community. I'm very new to this. I'm tracking it just because I'm interested in what's going on in our industry and how things are evolving. But it's important for there always to be kind of continuous work around standard specifications. Like, we are able nowadays to do all these amazing things in an automated fashion because at some level there's some standardization around how we work with these tools. And it could be just a default standard from like adoption, right? Like Kubernetes or Docker files, or it could be actual like, you know, IETF kind of standards for how Wi-Fi works or whatnot, right? So I know there could be it feels like there might be a proliferation of new standards, but what it means is that as an industry, we see a place where there could be a commonality, and we're trying to tease that out so that we can build higher level features and functionality and really do reduce the workload of migrating and going from one cloud to another. It's not trying to solve all your problems, and it's just enough spec on the things that everyone kind of agrees upon. Now, I know you see this Docker logo down here. This is not just like only Docker Co. like putting out another spec into the world. Actually, the main contributors to CNAB are some of the leads of Helm, Kubernetes Helm from the Windows side. Windows is an often neglected part when we're talking about DevOps and all this cool stuff, but you can imagine that there's scenarios where they're trying to package up more than just like a simple Docker file kind of app on the Windows side, and really trying to maybe leapfrog the industry and see how we can, whoa. I get kicked off. All right. Let me see. All right. So they took a couple steps back and said, all right, what does it mean to say that we have a package, right? So these are kind of the four areas of what a core package is. So they looked at all the package standards out there. So the first part here is like some metadata, right? Like version, who maintains it, who's responsible for it, the name, you know, what it does, things like that. On disk representation, right? You need to, the package at the end of the day is putting files somewhere. So you have some representation of a file system and where it wants to put files. Some idea of execution, right? Install, uninstall, what happens when you upgrade, what is it, what steps need to happen for that execution part, and a definition on how to distribute, right? Now, this part, you could just do like packages using zip files and email if you really wanted to, which is probably what we did for a long time and still do in a lot of places. But you know, we're here to define a new standard, and so we can kind of put that part into there. So they took a look at a lot of the different tools out there, and they realized that not every one of them has an actual package standard, and some of them have templates, some of them have like legit package definition, some have ways of distributing, right? Those things. And so the line between what CNAB is trying to do and what it's not trying to do is kind of in between here. Does that make sense? It's not trying to take over all these things, because then it would just be another tool that you can all ignore and just keep using Kubernetes, right? But these two parts, it's kind of trying to do, right? It's kind of making a spec around capturing this information and this information, encapsulating it. So compatibility between repositories and registries should help reduce the upfront cost. So right now, like with every one of those tools, you probably have to run some kind of repository to manage those packages, right? So who here runs like a satellite server for their RHEL, and then let's see, a Docker registry, and then maybe a Java, you know, artifact repository, and then you have like GitHub and GitLab, right? So that's, I mean, that's already like 4 that it's like a minimum. And then you have like Ansible and Terraform and these other things. Those have their own like registries, and then maybe you have, you know, mirrored NPM repos or Python kind of library, right? So you're just in a simple kind of example, you're probably running like 6 repositories. Wouldn't it be nice if there was just a standard open way to communicate between those, and it doesn't matter what's inside that package, but these registries could distribute all those kind of artifacts? So for the current CNAB spec, they're using the container runtime repository as like a way to prove out that the spec can work. So right now there's a compatible CNAB registry, and that's any kind of Docker registry, whether it's the Kubernetes one or Docker's one or an open source, another one. If it's compatible with the open container OCI, then it can be a repository for CNABs. The next layer up is not all tools have a package concept. And so in order to kind of make it agnostic, CNAB can be like a de facto package specification for all those tools, especially the ones that don't have one. So if you're emailing or just copying and pasting compose files or Terraform scripts from, you know, going to raw and just copying and pasting it into your repo or just cloning it, instead of having that, you could potentially just package that all up with your application. And if you're following this standard, you could just distribute that with everything else. And it has now a Terraform package. Does that make sense? So think of CNAB as more like MSI. I didn't write this sentence because I hate MSIs, but it's more like an MSI in the Windows world than it is like those higher level tools. Does that make sense? So it's kind of something where you can just open it up, one click install, one click uninstall, one click upgrade for any kind of workflow and actual end distributed application with multiple things going on. And it's trying to force compatibility between all these all this tooling. Does that make sense? All right. let's dive into the spec. Woo. You guys asked for it. All right. So the CNAB specifications at this URL right now, I would, if you're interested in this kind of low-level detail stuff, you can check it out. Contributions are welcome. The main thing behind this is it's still very new, and there's that line between what's in CNAB and what's out is kind of moving a little bit. But if you've got some really core problems in your organization and you can see this as potentially helping that, this might be, and this is like a new open source community, so it's always good to be kind of involved in the forefront. This is a good community to get kind of involved with if you're looking for that in your life. So what does CNAB look like? So that metadata layer, it's stored in a bundle.json file. It's not intended to be, it's human readable, but it's not really intended to be touched by humans. Think of it as more of something that other higher level tooling would create for you. Your CI/CD pipelines would probably manipulate and spit out. Then it has a specific file system inside that package that you have to kind of adhere to. So there's like a high-level CNAB folder, and there's an app folder where you can just stick all your other stuff into. And that's just to keep everything consistent in the standard so that one package tooling that's CNAB compatible can talk to another tool that's CNAB compatible. Right now, for execution of this, they're aiming toward OCI, the Open Container Standards, because that's kind of a natural place for where everyone's kind of working right now. And the sample tooling that I'll go into is kind of geared toward that currently. And then for distribution, like I mentioned, it's the OCI compatible distribution layer. So like DTR, Docker Hub, the Kubernetes, open source registries, anything that's OCI compliant can potentially support CNAB packages as well. This is just stuff that if you're really into specifications and standards, you'd be interested in. Let's just move forward because I think I'm losing you all. This is a complete snore fest here. All right, let's get excited about bundle.json. All right, so a schema for package metadata. This is kind of like one of the core kind of concepts and kind of encapsulates why this is going to be maybe something that takes off. So it's a very simple schema. And as you can see, these are very typical kind of metadata parameters that any kind of package would have on the planet. And it's the same thing for CNAB. So you have a place where you have basic metadata, the name of the package, the version, description, keywords, maintainers, license, all that kind of stuff. Then you also have, and then they realized, well, we don't want to, if you're going to distribute a package that has lots of stuff, say Terraform scripts that it includes Docker images that you have to build. It includes Helm and Helm stuff and charts and I don't know, some Ansible stuff thrown in there for good measure. All those things need credentials to communicate, right? Maybe you have to communicate to AWS or to your Kubernetes cluster. You don't want to put that into your package, right? You want to have that somewhere else. And so this is can be specified in your bundle.json that those credentials are required to be able to install or run that package. And so you can basically make those variables in the spec and say, I need a Kubernetes configuration, I need an AWS password, and I need an Ansible SSH key to be able to install this package. Does that make sense? It's a standard way of specifying that. Then you can also have actions. So the 3 default actions that every CNAB has to have is install, upgrade, and uninstall. But you can also put your own custom actions in for whatever other actions you might want to have. So it might be downgrade, or it could be monitor or status or whatever you want it to be. You can add additional parameters. These are just variables that you need maybe for your configuration of your distributed application. Could be, for example, how many default proxies to spin up, or how many of one specific container versus another specific container. And then you can also extend the spec with whatever information you want. And that allows higher level tooling. So this is all geared toward, imagine an ecosystem of higher level tooling, reading these bundle files and then producing interfaces for your developers, your organization to be able to run these packages and do those actions. So if you follow this, you get some of that benefit. So again, right now, OCI images are like the default image for this package. And so it's kind of, they're trying to make the most compatible layer meet up with what everyone's kind of doing right now. So who knows that like a Docker image is basically like a zip file? Does everyone know that? Do you know that basically every package is just a zip file with stuff? Okay. So this is no different, but it has some things that you have to meet. The cool thing is you can specify metadata around the runtime that you need to be able to execute that package, and you can put whatever you want into that image and build it. So not only can you have like, so right now you might have like a compose file, and you have like 3 Docker images in there, a proxy, a web server, and a database, right? Now, the compose file isn't, that still just tells the system to build those 3 Docker images. There's still just 3 packages that are being distributed. In CNAB, what you're saying is that you can collect all those images together, plus your Terraform and your bash scripts and everything else that you need at those version levels to actually just do the whole entire thing, whether that means building and installing an application or just installing that application. Does that make sense? And if you specify that at this time, you can run that using some of the example tooling as like one unit. And it automatically kind of, if the tool is, if you've met the spec, it would work. There's another thing, which is that if CNAB is, if you're kind of managing the lifecycle of a package, like for example, if you have like RPMs or debs on an operating system, the operating system knows if something else is touching that, right? It knows what packages are installed, it knows what the status and version. CNAB needs to have a record of that as well for the lifecycle of that package to be kind of maintained. And it needs to know when other things are interacting with those packages on that system or in that lifecycle. They're working on something called claims to be able to do that. That's still work in progress. Not going to be showing that today. The other big advantage to doing this, and this is for my Tom Clancy guy back there, is signing, attesting, verifying, and validating. One big advantage to using Docker and Kubernetes and all these kind of container specs is the ability to actually cryptographically sign and attest that nothing's changed in that binary or that zip file. CNAB has baked that all the way into its core, and now you can extend that not just to your Docker file and your Docker image, but to any kind of script or thing that you put in to this, in the kitchen that you put into your distributed application and sign it all cryptographically. And if you meet the spec, then you can have tools that validate that and only deploy when when things are kosher. So I know that in a lot of organizations, it's not like a big priority to do this. In the world I live in, like all our clients, all my customers, they care very deeply about this. And this is one of the biggest selling points for the move to containerization for a large group of my customers. And if you have to do anything with compliance and all that kind of jazz, it's a big advantage to be able to do this. Now imagine not only getting that from Docker files or containers, which you might not be doing yet, but getting it from anything that you're already running in an organization that you bundle into this. Does that resonate? All right. All right, let's look at some tools. So, of course, any good spec has to have a reference implementation to prove that it's doable. Duffel is the open source Go reference implementation of the CNAB spec. Think of it more as a hello world kind of, hey, this spec works, kind of go application command line application. Probably not going to be touching that if you're going to be entering this world. Now, what's really cool about CNAB is in the future, if this is successful, this will probably be the last time you even hear about CNAB, because if it's successful, it will just be all under the hood, and it'll be using some higher level tools that you're already using, and all this stuff is being done, this compatibility is being done in the background. So if things are successful, either you're not going to hear about it because it's dead, or it's really successful and everyone's using it and you don't have to worry about it because it's working. Does that make sense? Duffel is just a way to prove that the spec works. You can build these images using it. You can install or do those 3 main actions or whatever actions that your bundle.json specifies. So that's kind of like a low-level tool. On the other end of the spectrum is something called Docker App, and this is what was showcased at DockerCon EU 6 months ago, and represents more like what the user-facing version of something of a tool that would use CNAB underneath would look like. So this is an opinionated tool that uses CNAB to package Docker Compose as a one-click install kind of set of instructions. So right now, does anyone here use Docker Compose? So right now, how many people just like copy and paste a Docker Compose file, right, into your shells, into your terminal, and then like quickly fill in some variables, right? So this is kind of wrapping all that plus the parameters that you might fill, so that it becomes like a one unit. So instead of in my mind, when I was like preparing for this talk and looking at this tool, this is what Compose and all that was supposed to be like. This is what it was trying to be. It took a little while to get there, but I think this is what at the end state where the industry is going. It wouldn't surprise me if CNAB doesn't become the standard, that there's some other standard that looks very much like this between these different worlds that arises, because I think it's a natural next step for things that we need. So this is what I was going to demo to you. The demo, if I were to show it to you now, it's not like super crazy. It's very basic, but it's dramatically changing in the next couple of months. So that's why I don't want to show it to you. And then you're like, well, Nirmal showed me this really cool thing, and now I'm running it, and it does like 30 different other things, and it's not what we're talking about. So that's why I'm not going to show it to you, but I can show you like an example of what CNAB would empower. So here's a Docker Compose file, has some variables in it, right? Port text. In the Docker app, instead of putting it in the bundle.json file, they specified a metadata.yaml file and a parameters. So remember the parameters in the json.bundle or bundle.json, and remember the metadata section? That's just YAMLed for some reason. And then, yeah. So Docker app takes that metadata.yaml, takes that parameter.yaml. If you've specified those parameters, you specify install, and it basically runs that compose file, fills it all in, and it has a status action. That's an additional one, and an upgrade, like we mentioned, is another action. So very basic. There's also an inspect action that they added to the spec to show some information. To basically, under the hood, just run some Kubernetes commands. They also, with Docker apps, showed that you can use a Docker Hub Registry. So Docker Hub Registry knows the CNAB spec, and they basically pushed the CNAB package up and then installed it by pulling it down, just like Docker push or pull. So CNAB is basically just implementation detail and abstraction. It allows you to dive deep into it if you're really a nerd and want to manipulate and make tooling around it. Otherwise, it should be totally invisible to everyone in this room if it's successful and tools start adopting it. For that same example in the Docker app, we have the image. So when you do the Docker app bundle, it basically makes its own bundle.json file, which is the image specification. So it fills in from those YAML files the bundle.json. What are some advantages to using the spec, right? So any kind of specification or standard, there has to be some value for everyone to be able to adopt it. So one awesome value is that you're specifying the parameters that your distributed application needs to be able to run. You're specifying the credentials. So the Duffel tool actually has something called Dufflebag, which automatically makes an Electron app based off of the bundle.json file. That's pretty cool. So if you have an application that doesn't have a GUI, you can run one command and you get a GUI with those form fills for credentials and whatever, right? So if you're an enterprise company that's selling, B2B or B2C software, and you are, for some reason, selling a command line tool primarily, and you have a Windows user that's still in the dark ages, you could potentially just run one command and get a compatible cross-operating system user interface that gets updated like any other kind of Docker image would get updated. Pretty cool, right? So now you can start thinking, oh, I have all that metadata in that bundle.json, and that's a standard. So if I'm making tooling like Jenkins pipelines or CI/CD pipelines, I could start reading from that metadata or pumping that metadata out, and I get a lot of information that I need to. I'll know exactly what environment variables to fill in my CI/CD pipeline, right? Everyone's just like custom making their variables right now, right? And it's a mess. Like, how do we even manage all those weird variables that we're passing around in our pipelines? This is a way to kind of specify, these are all the things I need. And, versions in there, maintainer, you can put git commit labels, things like that. Making sense? Another one is you could support different tool chains, and it's all in the same signed package, right? So your organization A could adopt CNAB and sign that package, and it can have their version of Helm and their version of Terraform and their version of Ansible. Organization B, they could adopt CNAB as their package standard or tools that do CNAB and sign that package, and they can have all their stuff they want. And now those two packages, their end output is compatible and can be distributed and rationalized the same way. So for some other examples that work currently-ish, go to Gareth, Docker app CNAB examples. There's 4 applications. You can look at some of what the specs look like. They're very hello world. Get an example of what that means to you. And then this is that Dufflebag, which automatically creates a Electron app, which is, I think this is kind of mind-blowing, but that's just me. There's Porter. So this is kind of like an example of high-level tooling. So Porter automatically helps you make those bundle.json files, and you just specify, like, it basically can read certain file formats and automatically fill in all that stuff, so you don't even need to know. Like, this could not say CNAB, and you would never know. I'm not going to go into that, actually. All right, another example, and this is to kind of prove it out. Gareth, he likes to learn new programming languages by making clients for new specifications. Go hackers. So he made a Python client that basically he uses code to write those bundled JSON files. And so in the actual application code, it's specifying its own package, like how it's supposed to package itself. And now you can start to think like, oh, that's pretty cool. Like, if I can programmatically specify my whole entire distributed application in code, I can start to do some wacky automation stuff where, under the hood, it doesn't matter. This is kind of a janky way of doing it, but under the hood, if I'm just meeting that spec, it's now compatible with all these other things, right, in the future. So take a look at that. And if you're interested in learning a new programming language, oftentimes making clients for new specs is always a good way to learn a new language. So in conclusion, CNAB is kind of like the RPM or MSI for the cloud, right? So this is kind of a opinionated view of the cloud becoming the runtime, and these specifications becoming the way to specify the package that runs on the cloud in whatever that means. And if you're interested in hacking on this, come check it out. If you want to get involved, there's a Slack channel and there's open issues on GitHub. And it's starting to ramp up. The activity is definitely starting to ramp up. And there's going to be some big changes in the next couple months. So keep an eye out for this. And thank you. I know talking about standards and specs is not always the funnest. I'm about to lose my voice. So was that interesting?
Yes.
Definitely.
All right. Wow.
You're in a room full of geeks.
I know. Specs, right? I can open up for questions. I am not the most knowledgeable person on this, so if it could be a group effort on answering questions, that'd be awesome. If you want more information, check out cnab.io. And again, it's not just like a Docker thing. It's actually like a community thing. And pretty agnostic, actually, super agnostic. All right, any questions? Yes?
Is there like a registry of sample or community bundles already?
There are some on Docker Hub, but they're not many yet because the spec is still being kind of...
Not a dedicated chart registry type thing?
No, not yet. And I want to say that the spec is more about like the registries themselves being compatible with this package format versus being another registry of just CNABs.
Right.
So if CNAB is successful, you would be doing like a Docker pull push or a Helm, whatever, and it would be invisible to you. But the tools those command line tools would know that it's CNAB compatible. Does that make sense? Cool. Yes.
So just like any other like code dependency or package.
Yeah, dependencies.
Can I import a CNAB into another CNAB? Or do they not?
Yeah, so this question came up to Gareth at the same talk he did. And it's like, what about dependencies? You can't talk about packages and not talk about dependencies. So dependencies is where the line is, where CNAB stops. There are other tools that they want other higher level tools to manage those dependencies. And I think that's right because that world is already doing those kind of things, like at the registry level and at the like command line tool level. So this is more like a specification for that unit that the dependency management kind of system would read from.
Yeah, so this is like the manifest and then the resolvers and all that.
And that line is kind of blurry right now. I don't think it's going to go down the path of like nested stuff.
Yeah.
I think it wants to be deterministic, like this is a thing.
Uh-huh.
And if you need two things that interact with each other, either you make it into a bigger thing or you just have another tool that manages that.
Yeah, because it's always been something that like bothers me with Docker right now.
Yes.
It's so hard to like extend another.
Yeah. I don't think CNAB's going to go toward dependency management. But it does, I think it would help though, because it's clear actions that you can take, right? And clear metadata.
Thank you.
Yep.
It seems like for the CNABs, they're going to want credentials to do something interesting in the world when they install, for instance. Fair to say?
Yeah.
A CNAB pretty much has to interact with its outside world. So do you foresee there being like...
So CNAB's a spec.
Sure. But the content that is implementing the spec is going to do something to the outside world as part of an install or uninstall, presumably. Do you see there being a repo of like compatible with AWS CNAB where they've standardized? Because it feels like, what do you rely on being around you when you run?
Right. So the idea is that in that credentials section, in the parameter section of the bundle.json, you specify what is needed, what is required. So whatever high-level tool that you create to build that image and or run that image, that package, has to have that input. or otherwise it spits back like you can't run this. Like if it needs an AWS key and you don't provide it one, it's up to the implementation of that tool to make sure that it checks when it reads the manifest of the image to make sure that that information is passed in.
Does that mean there'd be like a CNAB for, let's just say I want to run a Docker registry. Let's say I want to run Jenkins, right? So I want to run Jenkins, I want to build a CNAB to do Jenkins install.
Right, so you might have like,
Jenkins for AWS, Jenkins for Azure, Jenkins for local Docker, Jenkins for
right.
Kubernetes.
Or it could be like CloudBees could make a CNAB where it has all those parameters in there and
it does whatever it can.
It does whatever it can. So it could have like a parameter that's a flag or an extension or a mixin that says, what environment am I installing this into? And then the package says, hey, I'm Jenkins, but I need at least these things minimum. So I think let me show you what an actual, you bring up a good thing. I didn't even actually show you guys what any of this kind of looks like. Oh, still not showing you what this looks like. I think the demo would have maybe answered some of this.
I can picture how one organization could standardize and say, we're always going to provide these variables. But it doesn't seem like you could easily share it outside in any consistent way.
So I don't know if you can see this. It has a credentials section here that says kube-config, and it has a path to where that config by default would be. This could be parameterized, and it could ask the user when they want to install this, point to a valid kube config. But in this case, it knows, like the spec here indicates that the image type is Docker. It's assuming there's a Docker environment there, that kind of stuff. So I think I understand what you're saying. I think that line is where the interface to CNAB and the higher level tooling, that's where that's going to be negotiated, and that's still kind of an active area. But right now, the spec does not force you for those actions for like install, uninstall, and upgrade. It doesn't specify what you have to do there. It's completely up to you. You can run whatever command line stuff you want to. So it could be like, an action could be install AWS as the action for that Jenkins one, and that would run a different command. It would run an AWS or a Terraform script, right? A certain version of Terraform, whatever. It could be like install dash, local, and that could, require a certain environment to be there. Does that make sense?
Sure.
So it's kind of like open right now. I don't think it's meant to be kind of dictating how that works. It's just dictating how that information should be stored so other things can read it, and it can guarantee that it's in that same place if it needs to be, if it needs to read it. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Oh, one more question.
Yeah.
You mentioned a couple minutes ago that this wasn't meant to be edited by a person. Or might
you could.
So are the
You
tools?
actually would want. Like
Yeah.
if you are building for a real application, I
Yeah.
don't think so you'd be able to.
Yeah, I think this would be other tooling. So like
Yes.
in theory, like the Docker app would fill this out.
Okay.
behind
that's
the
what I'm asking.
scenes.
It makes sense, like as like a grand central dispatch kind of thing where all these tools that you use can like post their like values they need and stuff.
Well,
But
yeah.
it all, that'd be
I
kind
don't
of-
think so. It's not trying to be a tool in that sense. It's a spec that other tools can adopt.
Yeah.
So that Grand Central would be whatever tool you use to manage your distribution of
Yeah.
whatever, right?
But if like all my tools in my tool chain, I could like run one thing to make them all post the values that they need.
Correct.
For this. That'd
Yeah.
be really cool because now I know that it's
Yeah,
consistent
so-
and has all the
I can totally see a CNAB plugin for Jenkins.
Yeah.
Or let me put it differently. A CNAB compatible tool that Jenkins uses to build this stuff.
yeah.
Does that make sense in the future? I'm pretty sure that's going to happen at some point.
So tools spit out their
Yeah, this would be in the
Yeah.
file structure. It would have, so there's a specific file structure here for this example. It has the CNAB folder. So you'd have some tool that spits out your build, right, with your Docker file and everything in this structure. So it has like a CNAB folder. It has in there the app folder with a make file. So this is a make file. I didn't even know that, right? So someone specified a make file. Let's take a look at what's in that make file. So here you can see the different actions, right? Install, uninstall, upgrade, and status. So this is meeting the spec in a make file, essentially. Does that make sense? And in this make file, it's running Helm commands. So CNAB's not specifying, hey, you need a make file and app / and the make file has to have Helm commands in here. It just says that it has to have something that says install, uninstall, and upgrade. And it has to do something when those actions are there. And everything else is optional. That make sense? Kind of answer that kind of question? Yeah. I think another point of confusion is I think most of us are not this deep down into like OCI and like how packages get moved around. Right now, all that stuff is kind of a mess. And this is kind of trying to standardize an API or a specification to kind of resolve that mess. Because the competing force is, you know, all these other things trying to lock you into that world, right? So hopefully this is kind of an antidote to that. I have another example of like a reason why someone would adopt this. Another Docker captain, he's trying it at VTech. He's one of the big IT guys there. And he's adopting it because he can give a new, like he does IT for the research group in Virginia Tech. And so if there's a new research group, you can basically hand them a CNAB, you know, bundle, and they can be off and running with like all this other config under the scenes, and they just have to do like Docker app install, and it kind of handles spinning up the Kubernetes stuff and handles building the images for them and pulling the right stuff down. That makes sense?
So wasn't he already have something like that here right now? Because it seems
he does.
Like exactly this example of make file.
Yeah.
So I'm going to build bigger file, make file. I will have all of these things already.
Yep. So I think, so remember Docker app is an opinionated implementation of the specification. So he's looking at it because that can solve some of his Docker Compose issues.
We're going to force him to do it. Or if he's going to ask someone else to do it, that he will make sure that things is done.
Right. Yep. So right now he has to kind of make a custom workflow in Jenkins for each new group.
Yes,
right, with their own Docker Compose files and whatever. So this way it can maybe alleviate. And he told me last night, he was like, hey, like stuff's evolving and we're still like, we haven't like gone full force on this, but it's an example of potentially what we could do. Any other questions? Yes.
Have you seen or could you explain what the sales pitch or incentive is for someone who's not HashiCorp or Microsoft to implement or to get involved with, like, let's say like whoever wears the pants at Red Hat now owns Ansible, for them to get on board and make this a reality? What's
the advantage to that?
What's the selling point that to them?
So this doesn't take over Ansible. It just makes it even easier for whoever in your organization to use Ansible. So right now, the main problem is if you're a vendor of a DevOps tool, I'm like almost puking just saying that. If you're a vendor of a configuration management tool,
User, I mean, like, could you? I don't think I understand. I'm trying to like imagine, like, if I was in their shoes, what would the incentive? Like
the end user or the vendor?
The vendor who makes the money from me, not.
So the vendors, they all want to think that they're the only shit in that organization, but they're not. Right? Now, some vendors play a little bit nicer than others, and I think adoption of this allows compatibility between whatever the group that is advocating their tools in the organization with some other group that's advocating some other tool in another part of the organization, and allows like them to show that they can ship that stuff more easily using this spec. So like, for example, if I'm organization A and I've got a Shadow Man tattoo on my back and I'm like 100% on Ansible, and then there's organization B that's like, bros with Chef and they've doubled down on Ruby and, they're just committing to the Ruby life. Those two organizations, they're thinking they're doing awesome stuff. They're building their Docker images, even though Docker kind of makes all that irrelevant anyway. Don't say that. But these two camps, they might be doing their Chef scripts and their Ansible scripts and packaging up their Kubernetes files and doing their own workflows. Now, all of a sudden, maybe for some reason, they got to ship one distributed application, or they need to interact in some kind of way. One person from one group's not going to go to the other group and say, hey, you all need to install Ansible this version and start building your app that way. The other Chef group's not going to do that either. But if Chef and Ansible, since they're open standards and it's open source software, if they implement, well, I don't think it even matters. If the build tools and the registry that their artifacts are being put into supports the CNAB standard, they can keep doing whatever they're doing, and the outputs of either group can be easily run and lifecycle managed by the other group without having to know a tool that they have never touched before. That's kind of the vision of the future for this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I still don't think I get why they're going to want to spend money.
So Ansible and Chef, they don't even touch any of this.
Yeah, so you're saying like it's already open source, and so whoever's maintaining that build tool, they're the ones.
Yeah. So
So if you want to actually motivate vendors to do anything collaborative, that's the way to do it with any place. Like for example, it's a lot of time in Java, all the J2E started with that. Otherwise, IBM was building differently, Java was doing differently. But when they have to actually build, so therefore that one, they have to first build the specs, and then everyone.
Yeah. So you can think of standards and specification as an antidote to that vendor lock-in. But so honestly, if CNAB is not the first time this is happening to those kind of tools. When Docker came around and containerization, that already happened. They're already struggling to figure out what to do in a more deterministic building world. So it should be completely invisible to them. Now, knowing people at Ansible and knowing people at Chef, I think they'd be all on board with trying to figure out how to, make their tool be able to be the one that spits these things out and runs it, which is fine. Doesn't really make much sense, but that's fine. It's whatever. It's a spec. You meet it, you don't, move on. So this only works if more based on people that adopt it. How many organizations adopt it. And like I said, if it's successful, it might be just completely invisible. So even those vendors won't know. You won't even know. Like even if you are using a tool like, what's a really popular Java repository? Maven or what's that? RFactory. Like they could be under the hood, have a CNAB compatibility, and it's completely invisible to everybody, And it could just be a patch that, the next version of whatever that repository is, and then maybe some tooling, and then all of a sudden you're talking that, but it's all completely invisible. In theory. Yeah. We'll see. I mean, so if you're interested.
Like I see this one is that way that for a smaller organization, which actually standardize on one tool, that's actually kind of their wiki page. That whenever you are distributing a file, you have to follow this thing.
Right.
So this is what it is. But if you have a company like you, where everyone doing different tools, then you need to have some way to standardize, and that's the one.
Yeah.
But that's why on those environment, wiki pages usually doesn't work because I have my own wiki page, you have your own wiki page. And we are not really. You
won't read CNAB compatible. Yeah. You'll read, if you use this tool, you'll be able to move your workload from this place to this place to this place, and the workflow that builds you your workload, or builds you your image. all packaged together. There'll be some marketing material and some tool that some startup in this room creates that says that line, and what's really driving that is CNAB under the hood, and no one will know. Does that make sense? Very. Okay. Whew, I am definitely losing my voice. So.
Nice work.
All right. Any other questions? Yeah? No? Okay.
Happy
Man, that was a